Greetings, students. This particular lecture is on the continuation of plant reproductive system. And there are two important aspects that we need to recognize as we go along. That the first facet is the floral morphology. The morphologies are as varied as the flowers are. And this is important. The second aspect is on the processes of reproduction in the plants. And we are focusing on both the sexual and the asexual processes in the plants of interest for breeding. And I may have to remind you that the scope that the exam considers emphasizes on these two aspects of the plant reproductive system. I would like to remind you, therefore, on the part that concerns the morphological aspect. We see, or one experiences, the vast diversity of colors, the coloring of the flowers, quite an enormous diversity across species. So the entire morphological part is very obvious in the plants. Whether it's an entire plant or whether it is the specific inflorescence morphology or the individual reproductive plant parts. And so when we are looking at the entire plant, we have not just the color diversity that is displayed. We also have the size or different sizes of the flowers displayed. And we have the shape display. And as this slide shows, they are the various bits of the morphologies that are obvious, right from the entire plant to particular ones, and where the stars are actually indicated as is obvious in the stylet and staminate, we have specific terminologies, which if you associate with the morphological partitions of the plant reproductive system, it becomes easier. Then we have in the notes the part represented by certain colored plants in different pots. So, like you to take those different pots as a potted plant example, and it will simplify also the terminologies that actually describe the morphologies. Indeed, if we take the same potted plant as you've seen in the previous notes, we have certain parts, and particularly the inflorescence position describing or described by various terminologies such as hermaphroditism, monoicism, and gymnomonoicism or andromonoicism. And then we have what one might want to call the gender separation. That gender separation is strictly unisexual. It can be unisexual or on different plants. It can also be unisexual. When it is unisexual and there is a separation of the sexual parts or reproductive parts, then we have a monoecious condition on either the same or separate plants. And we have some of the important qualifications. I have listed 3 characteristics for the monoecious plants. One is the unisexuality of the reproductive parts. For example, in maize, that is monoecious plant, the female with the silk and the male with the tassel separated in the position of the 2 inflorescences is very common indication of wind pollination. Very common in temperate regions. Then we have the monoecious condition in which some self-pollination can occur but is less likely. Then we have the dioecious plants. And this is where we encounter about 4% of dioecium occurring in 4% of the angiosperms. Angiosperms are generally the flowering plants. And dioecious plants are scattered throughout the globe. Common in tropical regions and oceanic islands. In dioecious plants, the flowers are generally small-sized. And those plants, the is 100% outcrossing, fairly inefficient because of the expected loss of pollen, because wind may simply waste the pollen. Some may drop in water. Some may be scorched under a hot sun, and so on and so forth. So dioecious plants in their pollination process we lose a lot of pollen, and therefore there is a lot of inefficiency in the pollination. In dioecious plants, pollination is often controlled by sex chromosomes. Now, when we talk about hermaphroditic flowers, you will excuse my pronunciation and biting of the tongue. These are what are known as bisexual flowers. Bisexual flowers, hermaphroditic. And here they can be described as being fairly faithful to themselves. They are not polygamous. They may be self-compatible, meaning that they are capable of self-fertilization, or they can actually even be cross-fertilization in them. They may be self-incompatible, meaning that only are capable of cross-fertilization. Autogamy is a terminology which refers to self-fertilization, automatic gamete exchange within a flower. Or among flowers of the same individual. And about 25% of this autogamous process is in the plant taxa. In other words, 25% of plant taxa have autogamous fertilization. Then we have a case of dichogamy, and this may occur where anthers release pollen before stigma is receptive. And this occurs in insect pollinated plants. This is in the stamen. That's where that first star shows the reproductive part in which dichogamy applies. Then the star on the left is in the stigma. This is when the stigma is ready before the anthers are matured. In effect, that's where the first visitation of the insects or the pollinators come to. And obviously, if they come to visit, they may be having pollen that is moved from a source they visited prior to visiting the particular one, and they find the stigma is ready. So they pollinate the stigma with the pollen that is from elsewhere than that released by the anthers in the same plant, because those are not ready yet. So, which are the reproductive parts that have face-to-face relationship between them? Right? You have the anthers and you have the stigma. This case would be true for self-fertilization because they face each other in some harmony and they mature at the same time and ready at the same time. We expect the pollination and fertilization to be in synchrony. That situation is what we can refer to as homogamy. Homogamy. Now, we have another case where we have some parts in the flower moving away from the other parts in the same flower. It's called movement achogamy. And this can occur when we have the stigma moving away. In other words, the style is moving away from the anthers in the same plant. Movement achogamy. So achogamy is of three types. We have the approach achogamy, where the presentation of the stigma is above the level of the anthers. The stigma is above. That is approach achogamy. The pin, the anthers are pinned down, and therefore that's a pin flower. And there are diagrams in the previous lecture that show that. Then reverse achogamy is where the stigma is recessed, the stigma is thrummed below the level of the anthers. Those are the terms. So let's come to the process features. The process features, because so far, so good. We have looked at the flower morphologies and the respective reproductive parts of those morphologies. So in the process features, we have sexual reproduction, where we have the babies resulting from meiosis, fertilization, from the meiosis and fertilization of egg by sperm following the pollination. And here in the sexual reproduction, we expect the offspring to be genetically different from parents due to recombination. And this is very important because when the offspring are genetically different from the parents, then they constitute a variation across the offspring. And if that variation is successful, it's known to represent a reproductive fitness. And it's where, when the plant breeders cross parents, they expect that variation to select from those that are offsprings of promise to be parents for the other next generation. Because crossing, as we shall see, is a continuous process. So sexual reproduction generates genetic variation that makes evolutionary adaptation very possible. And as I mentioned before, that evolutionary adaptation possible is what is referred as fitness, adaptive fitness. And there are advantages over outcrossing, pollination. Well-preserved genotypes are available, breeding true to type. And there is no need for pollinators to come in. Disadvantages is that there is a decreased genetic variability because every time we are heading toward homozygosity. Remember, in your genetics, when we cross parents, we get an F1 hybrid, is heterozygous. And if we keep on selfing it, we are getting homozygosity increasing as we go further down. That is very important for you. Please recall your genetics to recognize that then in that case, with increasing selfing, we get homozygosity increasing from 25 to 50 to 75 and can get in principle to 100% homozygosity, when in fact the variation that was captured in the heterozygous hybrid is now shared between the dominant homozygosity and the recessive homozygosity. So we do see the advantages of orthogamy here, and the bullets underneath are self-explanatory. Then we have a close-chain response in self-pollination, and we have seen the issues of orthogamy there, and we have seen the issues of the advantages and disadvantages. Then we come to the outcrossing process controls. One of them is the self-incompatibility. We may have sporophytic self-incompatibility, and it occurs in species such as the vegetables that are listed here. You can see. Then we have the gametophytic incompatibility. Notice that the sporophytic self-incompatibility is where, when the outer pollen wall, not WAAL, but WALL, called the exine, touches the stigma, then if it has the genetic aspect of S1, S2 that is similar to that, that is the same genetic aspect in the stigma, then there is self-incompatibility. The same applies to the second or the middle picture, and where we have the exine chromosomes being different from the stigmatic genetics, then we do have the compatibility occurring. Gametophytic self-incompatibility also works on the same principle, as you can see. So when we come to genetic, we have various mechanisms that promote cross-pollination, and they are listed here, about 6, but I have put there the physical removal, which plant breeders undertake to either remove the tassels to make the plant female by leaving the one where the silk is to allow for cross-pollination, or removing the silk, the female part, to leave the tassels. And we have the various advantages, as you can see, given here. Then, to conclude on this, we have the asexual reproduction. And this table 7.1, borrowed from elsewhere, does distinguish the asexual reproduction from the sexual reproduction, as you can see. And there is a brief description and definition of this that you can see in the right column. Please study them. And you can see the various morphologies of the asexual reproduction. The bulb, onion and garlic being an example. The comb being the colocasia and banana as examples. Then the rhizome, ginger, is a very good example of the rhizome. In fact, I have an example of the rhizome to show. This is a rhizome. ginger. It is a rhizome. You can see it is bigger than some of the rhizomes we tend to associate with grasses, which are thin, spindulous, spread, rhizomatous roots. Then we have the strawberry and the colocasia again. You can see the colocasia has both a comb and also it has the runners. And then we have the potato or potato. All these asexual parts can be asexually propagated. And so we have a description of these various ones: the bulb, the runners, the rhizomes, the combs, and the tubers. And please study them as we go along. Then we have the modes, the processes of vegetative reproduction. And as you can see, they are given under these various asexual reproductive parts. They can give rise to entire plants. Now, asexual reproduction is where we may have the resulting plants being genetically identical from the single parent asexual part. And this is via cloning or agamosperming. Agamosperming. No meiosis, no fertilization, and no recombination. And there are certain advantages that such plants are very well adapted to local environment and will have offspring with a competitive advantage. And indeed, most of the asexually reproduced plants tend to be very weedy, and they can be very vicious in competing against the crop plants. And these processes of agamosperming are as indicated here. And look at those notes carefully. Apomixis is one of the agamospermic process, and it's very important. And as you can see here, and look at your notes carefully, it is described in detail. And of course, here we have about 40 families in about 130 genera and 400 species that are apomictic. And of course, plant breeders have got interested in the issue of apomixis. And as it is, we have the features here, and this diagram generally summarizes the sexuals and the apomicts as we see them. Please study this diagram very carefully because it is a complete summary, and pay attention to the various stages of the sexual and the apomicts. Pay the attention as to the various stages that compare, and pay attention to what are the products of the amphimixis and the apomixis. This diagram simply explains this one here. They are the same. So to conclude, plant breeders have been interested in the apomix, and there is some perceived use of apomixis in breeding. As efforts have shown, and the interest in apomixis is that it fixes hybrid vigor and it fixes heterozygous status. This has been tried in maize, but again, the success of it has yet to be realized. That brings to an end this review of the plant breeding.